Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Innistrad Crimson Vow spoilers. And whew, after yesterday's marathon spoiler day where we had like an hour-long video and so many cards, today, a little bit lighter day as far as the number of cards, but we still have some really interesting stuff. Maybe the best vampire from the set so far, an insane combo piece zombie, which means we should probably jump right into it. Start talking sweet new Innistrad Crimson Vow cards. Before we do, two quick reminders. One, if you want to keep up with all the latest previews throughout the day, we got them over at MTGpreviews.com. You can sort them, you can filter them, all that good stuff. Number two, if you need some Crimson Vow cards, or really any cards, you can get them from our awesome sponsor, Card Kingdom, by heading over to cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Even get a free MTGGoldfish sticker. Just let them know you want one in your order notes, and they'll hook you up for free. They're super cool like that. So with our sponsorship stuff out of the way, let's talk Innistrad Crimson Vow. First up today, we got a spicy new Mythic vampire, Henrika. So the front side of Henrika Domnathi, is a 4-mana 1/3 legendary vampire with flying, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, you get to choose one that hasn't been chosen yet. Out of each player sacks a creature, you draw a card and lose a life, or transform Henrika. Once you transform Henrika, you get Henrika Infernal Seer, a 3/4 flying death touch lifelink, where you can pay 3 mana to pump each creature you control with flying death touch and or lifelink, +1/+0 until end of turn. Also, a whole bunch of different card styles, showcase the Dracula card style. So Henrika, pretty interesting card. It reminds me a little bit of a slow Rankle in the 4-drop slot in our last standard. Did something kind of similar where you can make players sacrifice, you can draw cards. On the other hand, you can also just have this be a super vampire Nighthawk, essentially, where you play this and the first thing you choose is transform. You transform it into a 3/4 flying death touch lifelink, which is exactly vampire Nighthawk for 1 more mana with 1 more power with 1 more toughness. How good is this card? I really don't know. The flexibility is nice. Like, if you're feeling safe, you can play Henrika, leave it in its small mode to, draw a card for the first turn. Maybe the next turn, if you got something sacrificable, make your opponent sacrifice, and then eventually transform it. On the other hand, if you're up against an aggro deck and about to die, you can just flip this immediately to have this big lifelinking blocker to help keep you alive. So I think there is some power here. As far as actually building around its ability, I think you can. Like, you can build a vampire tribal deck even that has exclusively cards with flying death touch and lifelink. Like, you got Valentin in the 1-drop slot, Null Priest of Oblivion, Voldaren Bloodcaster, Falconwrath Forebears, Nighthawk Scavenger. So you could go all in on that last ability, although really, I think that's kind of a bonus more than anything. I don't think you really want to build around pumping your team, although I guess, like, if you get to 6 mana and can double pump, that is a lot of damage, and it is a creature itself with flying death touch and lifelink, so you can use it to pump itself, essentially, making it into an even bigger attacker. So the upside of this card is it does kind of destroy everything in the air. Like, worst case, because it has death touch, it's going to trade up with things like Inferno of Starmounts or Goldspan Dragon or a Flip Smoldering Egg. Best case, it just stonewalls Redains and Elite Spellbinders and basically the whole mono white deck and a lot of green creatures as well. So because of its combination of abilities, it is really effective on offense and defense. On the other hand, it does die to a lot of removal. Sure, everything dies to Fateful Absence, everything dies to Power Word Kill, but a lot of the soft red removal that sees play, like Thundering Rebuke and Demon Bolt, deals 4 damage, so it does kind of somewhat line up poorly with the removal that is seeing play in the format. That's not necessarily a deal breaker, but that is something to keep in mind. 4 toughness, that does die to a lot of stuff in our current format. I think one of the cute synergies for this card is Zagras. Zagras gives your entire team death touch, also a vampire if you want to go the tribal route, so it gives all your creatures death touch, which means no matter what creatures you have, Henrika's last ability can pump it and let you force through a ton of damage. So we'll have to wait and see. Henrika Domnathi, I think the card's really sweet. I like the transform ability. I think the back half is a super vampire Nighthawk is a pretty powerful card, even if it doesn't line up super well with the removal that sees play in the format. The front half, though, is pretty small. Keeping it on that half is risky, but that's part of the fun of this card. You can keep it on the front half for a few turns to try to get more value out of it, knowing you're going to have a underpowered creature. I mean, a 1/3 for 4 is pretty underpowered, or you can just flip it around to a more on-curve body right away, but miss out on the chance to draw a card or make your opponent sacrifice a creature. So whether this card ends up being good enough for a standard, I think we'll have to wait and see. Vampire Nighthawk does have a pretty long history of being playable, and this, for 1 more mana, gives you a lot of upside, so I think there's a decent chance that this will see play somewhere. Worst case, it's a good way to take down your opposing Goldspan dragons and so forth, which otherwise might be a problem for a vampire deck. And remember, if you can trade with a Goldspan in combat, you're not even giving your opponent the token because you're not targeting it. So there is a lot of upside. Is a weird like flying removal spell that gains you life, decent against the dragon decks because it blocks other big threats, decent against the aggro decks because it's a death-touching, life-linking blocker that can take down anything. So maybe it's just good enough as a super Vampire Nighthawk in enough matchups so you don't even got to build around it, but it just tangles with everything effectively in the air and on the ground. So I like this card. I think this card's got a shot in Standard, in Vampires, and perhaps just in other mid-range style decks as well. Next up, we have a spicy combo zombie in Patchwork Crawler. So Patchwork Crawler, 2 mana 1/2. Pay 3 to exile a creature card from your graveyard and put a +1/+1 counter on Patchwork Crawler. And then, most importantly, it has all the activated abilities of all the creature cards that are exiled with it. So Patchwork Crawler, not a very good creature as far as beating down. I mean, a 2 mana 1/2 below the curve. You can pay 3 to make it a 2/3. That's really, really slow. And it's not even graveyard hate because you can only exile creatures from your graveyard. So as far as being a threat that's going to attack and block, Patchwork Crawler pretty bad. But that's fine because Patchwork Crawler isn't about attacking and blocking. It's about being a combo piece. We've seen past creatures like Necroticus, Experiment Crush, Dark Imposter with similar abilities, stealing activated abilities from other creatures, be really powerful as combo pieces because they do a couple of different things. There's a few different ways to combo with them. One is you can steal the activated ability of a creature that also has a drawback in its text, but get around the drawback because you don't get the drawback. You don't get all the text, you just get the activated ability text. Also allows you to combine together activated abilities that Wizards would never put on the same card, because you can exile 2, 3, 4 cards with Patchwork Crawler, and that opens up some really interesting combo potential. So as far as Standard is concerned, I couldn't find an infinite combo for this card. If I'm missing one, let me know. The best thing I've seen to do with it is exile Asmodeus the Archfiend. Asmodeus has an ability where you can pay 3 black mana to draw 7 cards. The problem is it has a big drawback. You don't get to draw cards. They go to exile. Then you got to pay a mana to put them out of exile into your hand, and you lose a bunch of life. Patchwork Crawler gets the good part of Asmodeus, the pay 3 to draw 7 without any of the drawback text, which is kind of insane. Like 3 mana to draw 7 cards is way above the curve. That's ability that you play in Legacy or Modern. Like that is super, super strong. It is still slow. You got to get Asmodeus in your graveyard, and then you got to activate it for 3 mana. Then you got to pay 3 mana to draw cards. So we'll see how competitive this ends up being. But getting an Asmodeus exile with Patchwork Crawler, one of the best things you can do in Standard. Also in Standard, there's a combo that doesn't work. When I first saw Patchwork Crawler, I was digging through all the cards in Standard, trying to find a way to go infinite, and I saw Clever Conjurer. So Clever Conjurer has an ability that says, untap target permanent not named Clever Conjurer. So I thought, oh, that's kind of sweet. Like you can exile Clever Conjurer, then you got a Patchwork Crawler that can tap itself to untap itself, and then you just got to find a payoff for that. But this is important. This doesn't actually work. With a creature like Clever Conjurer, the text of the name in the activated ability transforms into Patchwork Crawler's text. So let's say we did activate Patchwork Crawler and exile a Clever Conjurer. The activated ability we'd get would say untap target permanent not named Patchwork Crawler. So keep that in mind. A lot of times this is an upside, but it can also be a drawback. So as you're finding your combos, keep in mind that the name does transfer over as well. In older formats, there's a bunch of different ways to go infinite with this card. In Commander and Modern, wherever. One of the easiest is to steal 2 activated abilities with Patchwork Crawler. One that allows it to tap for a reasonable amount of mana, like a Faber Elder, or Bloom Tender, or Gothian Elder, untapping 2 lands. And then also steal the activated ability of something that lets Patchwork Crawler untap itself for less mana than the mana ability makes. So let's say we exile a Argothian Elder, tap it to untap 2 lands, and then we also exile a Horseshoe Crab, pay 1 blue mana to untap it. We can use Patchwork Crawler to untap 2 lands and make 2 mana, pay 1 of that mana to untap it using Horseshoe Crab's ability, and do that again and again and again for infinite mana. There's a bunch of different ways to do this, like Pilly Pala, Pure Sight Marrow give you the untap abilities for cheap, Faber Elders, Bloom Tenders. There's a bunch of things that tap for multiple mana. So there's several ways to make infinite mana. There's there's also the classic Necrotic Ooze combo of Phyrexian Devourer along with Triskelion or Walking Ballista. So Phyrexian Devourer, it's one of those drawback cards. It has an activated ability, which is insane. Pay 0 mana, remove the top card of your library from the game to put a +X/+X counter on Phyrexian Devourer, where X is equal to the card's casting cost. This has changed. It's X+1/+1 counters now, but essentially you exile a 5-drop, you get 5 +1/+1 counters. The downside is Phyrexian Devourer is balanced by the fact that when its power is 7 or greater, you gotta bury it. Well, if we can steal that ability with Patchwork Crawler, we don't get the drawback tax. So Patchwork Crawler just has an ability where we can exile the top card of our deck, add a bunch of counters to it, make it super, super big, and then we could just beat down with it, or we can steal a Triskelion or Walking Ballista's ability that lets us remove a +1/+1 counter from it to ping something for a damage to get infinite damage. We just Patchwork Crawler, exile a ton of cards, give it a ton of +1/+1 counters, remove all those counters to ping our opponent out of the game. There's also a pretty janky commander combo where you turn Patchwork Crawler into a Myriad Phantasm. Myriad Phantasm has this weird activated ability where you pay 1 and a blue, shuffle it into its owner's library, and then you reveal cards until you hit a Myriad Phantasm, and then all the rest of the cards go to the graveyard. Well, obviously, Patchwork Crawler is not a Myriad Phantasm. If you exiled your 1 Myriad Phantasm from the graveyard with Patchwork Crawler, there are 0 copies in your deck, so this would give you a Patchwork Crawler that can pay 2 mana, shuffle itself into your deck, and then mill your entire deck, and then you can just win the game with a Thassa's Oracle or something. Also, conveniently, all blue cards for commander color identity purposes. It also works really well with things that make its ability cheaper, like Training Ground, Zerta, Biomancer's Familiar. If you can pay 1 mana to exile a creature from your graveyard, it becomes much, much easier to pull off some of these combos. You can exile the Untapper for 1 mana, exile the Mana Dork for 1 mana, and then just proceed to go infinite. So keep these cards in mind as well. They really help power up Patchwork Crawler, and it's kind of cute in Commander for 2 reasons. One is, it seems like an auto-include in decks that are built around stealing activated abilities, like Maricel, Experiment Crash. The other kind of cute thing it can do is, let's say your commander dies, and you have a Patchwork Crawler out. Let's say you're playing Kenrith. You can use Patchwork Crawler to exile Kenrith. Kenrith is going to go back to your command zone anyway. You'll have the option to put it into your command zone, so you're going to get it back either way, and now you're going to have a Patchwork Crawler with all of Kenrith's abilities. Pay a red for Trample and Haste, and put counters on things, and draw cards, and gain life, and reanimate things, which is kind of cute anyway. So you can counterintuitively put your commander into the graveyard if you have Patchwork Crawler out, steal its abilities, and then get it back to the command zone where you want it anyway. So Patchwork Crawler, really interesting card. Not really sure what you do with it in Standard. Not really sure if it's good enough in older formats. Necrotic Ooze is just a lot faster in most ways. It just comes down and immediately steals all those abilities, where Patchwork Crawler, you gotta pay a bunch of mana, so it might not be super competitive, but it is super fun, super unique, and I'm super hyped to try to find a way to break this in Standard. So if you got ideas of how to go infinite, how to do anything other than draw 7 cards with this in Standard, let me know in the comments, because I'd love to build a sweet Patchwork Crawler deck. We also got a big old vampire in Bloodvial Purveyor. So a 4 mana 5/6 flying triple vampire. So absolutely huge, way above the curve even in 2021. Bad news is, when an opponent casts a spell, they get a blood token that they can sack to Rummage, obviously. But there's a little upside here. When it attacks, it gets +1/+0 for each blood token defending player controls. Oddly, that does not say until end of turn, which I assume has to be a mistake, and it's going to be errated to say end of turn. We've never really had a black border paper mechanic that would let this effect last permanently. I don't know, maybe Wizards doing something completely new that we've never seen before, and it does stick around permanently, but I'm like 99% sure that they're going to errata this to say end of turn. So Bloodvial Purveyor, really, really interesting. On one hand, it is massive. It is big enough to shut down all the dragons running around in Standard. A 5/6 for 4 stops Goldspan, and a Flip Smothering, and an Imreth. You name a big flyer, and this is going to tangle with it well in combat. It's also an incredibly fast clock. Like, if you start attacking, this kills your opponent at worst in 4 attacks, and if they got some blood tokens sitting around, even faster than that. It's also great at blocking against, like, mono green or mono white. The downside is, you're giving your opponent all these blood tokens, and yes, it can grow itself based on the blood tokens, but your opponent can cheaply sacrifice them. More importantly, your opponent can use them to dig for answers. We've seen some cards like this in the past be somewhat successful, like Abyssal Persecutor, 6/6 flying treble for 4 with a big drawback. Desecration Demon, 6/6 flying for 4 with a pretty big drawback. Bloodvial Purveyor is kind of like that. The difference is, neither Abyssal Persecutor or Desecration Demon give your opponent a way to filter through cards, and that is my biggest concern with Bloodvial Purveyor. If it sticks on the battlefield, it's a great clock. The problem is, the blood tokens are going to allow your opponent to dig through their deck to find an answer to Bloodvial Purveyor, and essentially every deck in the format is going to have some sort of my hand. So you got Fateful Absence, you got Inferno Grasp. Green decks can fight it with Blizzard Brawl like an Old Growth Troll. Blue decks, or Izzet decks that don't have, hard removal can bounce it with Fading Hope or Divide by Zero. So the worst case is you play this, your opponent keeps it around for a turn, casts a few spells, makes a few blood tokens, and then just kills it with a removal spell, and then you're kind of in really rough shape. You gave your opponent a lot of value and got really nothing for it other than a dead Bloodvial Purveyor. So we'll have to see. If you want to go super janky, you could like play a Stony Silence to shut down your opponent from like cracking the blood tokens, or a Karn or Magnetic Mind to damage your opponent when they sack them. That's really, really janky though. I don't know. I really am on the fence with this one. On one hand, it is a ridiculous fast clock. On the other hand, I'm naturally skeptical of cards that give your opponent value, and this does give your opponent a lot of value. It's very possible your opponent's going to make 2 or 3 blood tokens a turn while this is out, because they can sacrifice the blood tokens to discard useless lands to find more action to make more blood tokens. So I don't know. Part of me wants to say this card's going to be good, just because the stats are good, and it does line up really well with the big flyers in the format. The other part of me fears that you're going to play this, your opponent's going to make 2 or 3 blood tokens and kill it, and they're going to win the game with the blood tokens that you gave them. So high risk, high reward, fast clock. Where it shakes out, we're going to have to wait and see, but definitely a card to keep in mind for Standard, just because its stats are pretty off the charts for a 4-mana flyer. We also got Stensia Uprising, a new red enchantment, 4 mana. At the beginning of your end step, you make a 1/1 red human creature token, and then if you control exactly 13 permanents, back to the 13 motif for Innistrad, you may sacrifice it to deal 7 damage to any target. So Stensia Uprising, I'm really not sure. It compares a little bit to like From Beyond. We've seen enchantments before that make a 1/1 each turn. Uprising gonna do the same thing, and then you essentially get a upgraded Cinder Storm, which normally costs 7 mana. You're gonna get for 4 mana once you get to 13 permanents. I don't know if either of these modes though is especially exciting. Like, you're only getting a 1/1 each turn for your 4 mana investment. It's gonna take a lot of turns of 1/1s to make it worth 4 mana, and then you need to hit the right mixture later in the game of permanents to eventually deal 7 damage, and it's not like you win the game, it's just 7 damage to something, which if you get enough damage could close out the game. I could see it pressuring the opponent as your permanents build up, but still, I don't know. We've seen other enchantments that make tokens that can literally win the game on their own. So Skeletal Swarming, the most recent example, which I honestly underestimated during spoiler season. It has proven to be very, very powerful when it sticks on the battlefield, but it's making these skeletons, they get huge and they trample and they can kill your opponent. Same with Assemble the Legion. If it sits out for a while, you're going to make a ton of tokens each turn until it eventually wins the game on its own. Stensia Uprising is probably not going to do that. It's always only making a single 1/1, and then you're getting 7 damage. So I feel like this is probably going to be a bulk rare. I mean, it's even in the wrong colors for humans. Most of the human payoffs are in green and white. Are you really going to splash a double red enchantment that costs 4 mana to make a single 1/1 and maybe get some damage eventually? Probably not. Maybe there's some sort of like human-y burn style deck, or maybe you can play it in, just a dedicated mono red burn or aggro deck where the idea is eventually you're going to get that 7 damage to close out the game. But I don't know. I think this card is probably pretty weak. I would be surprised if it could see play in Standard, and I don't even know if it'll see play anyplace else. Like, once you get to Commander, 7 damage is kind of silly. Like, that's not going to close out the game most often. When your opponents have 120 life between them, 7 is kind of nothing really, and you're only getting a 1/1, so I don't know. A little bit too expensive, a little bit too lacking in impact for me to think this really has a shot in any format. On the other end, we did get another enchantment, which I think might have a shot in multiple formats. Dreadful Service. So 3 mana enchantment. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Trigger this ability only once each turn. So once this gets on the battlefield, if you can discard a card on each of your turns, you're getting a free 2/2. If you can discard a card also on your opponent's turn, it gets even better. If you're playing Standard, you get 2 2/2s a turn. If you're playing something like Commander, you could be getting 4 2/2s a turn. I think this card is designed to work with blood tokens in Standard. That's probably the easiest way to abuse it. Make a bunch of blood tokens. On your turn, sacrifice 1 to rummage, and then also trigger your Dreadful Service to make a 2/2. On your opponent's turn, sack another one to rummage to make another 2/2. That's a pretty powerful value engine. Like, it's only 1 more mana than Bitter Blossom, and as long as you can be discarding each turn, it's going to make a lot of tokens. Like, it is a really, really powerful effect. Sure, I know the once each turn limit might look like a big deal, but I really don't think it is. If you're getting a token every turn, that's still worth the investment. The only awkward part of this is it makes zombies, and blood tokens care about vampires, so you get a little bit of a weird tribal mix, but maybe there's just a blood token deck that doesn't actually care about the vampire creature type. Maybe you're not playing vampire lords, you're just playing blood token stuff, and then this would be a great addition to the deck. We also have a lot of other just generic discard stuff in standard. Conspiracy Theorist cares about discard. Moonveil Regent, Magnetic Channeler, Plarg, the Celestis allow you to discard. So there is definitely ways that you can build a deck around this and consistently be discarding enough cards to make it worth the effort, to be making those zombies every single turn cycle. So I think this card could actually be pretty powerful in standard. Outside of standard, it reminds me a little bit of Drakehaven. Drakehaven, whenever you cycle or discard a card, you can pay one to make a 2/2 Drake with flying, also with 3-mana enchantment. These cards kind of care about the same thing. One of the easiest ways outside of standard to trigger this consistently is not blood tokens, but cycling cards. And we got a decent amount of cycling payoffs. You got Dreadful Service, you got Drakehaven, you got Faith of the Devoted, you got Archfiend Ifnir. So maybe there's like a historic deck or a pioneer deck or a modern deck that's just looking to play Dreadful Service and play Drakehaven, maybe some of the other payoffs, and then cycle some cheap cycler each turn to make a bunch of tokens to drain the opponent to kill your creatures with Archfiend of Ifnir. Another interesting option could be sticking in a Madness deck in historic or modern or commander, where you're already trying to discard cards because of Madness, and Dreadful Service just cares that you discard a card. It doesn't care if you end up casting that card with a Madness cost. So it seems like a natural fit there. My only question is it too slow? Like, the Madness decks we see in 60 card formats tend to be really aggressive, and I'm not sure they want to, like, I don't know, play a 3-mana enchantment that the next turn when they Faithless Looting or Seasoned Pyromancer gives them an extra 2/2. It might just not be fast enough. Dreadful Service seems more about grindy long game value than quick Madness value, but still, it would fit naturally with what a Madness deck is trying to do in any of those older formats. In Commander, maybe a zombie deck like Farina that naturally discards could play it for value, but I think this is mostly like a Sephris card. Sephris, one of the easiest ways to trigger it is to cycle a card each turn, because you need a card going into your graveyard. If you're cycling each turn, you're also making a zombie each turn, and if you're just naturally getting 4 zombies each turn cycle in Commander, that's actually a pretty powerful effect. So Dreadful Service, I know the once each turn restriction seems like a big deal, but I don't think it is. I think this is actually a pretty powerful card in a blood token deck in standard, in a cycling style deck. You certainly got to build around it, and it's not just going to naturally be good, but it is a worthy payoff for a deck that is built around discarding your own cards every single turn. In the world of lower rarity cards and reprints, we got a couple good ones. Hero's Downfall, downgraded to rare for the first time ever. Just 3 mana instant, blow up a creature, a planeswalker, has been a rare since Theros. Not super high value, like $2 or $3, but still is uncommon. That is solid, and this is a pretty good removal spell. This is our replacement for Murderous Rider. Being able to blow up anything of relevance for 3 mana is not a bad deal. It is 1 more mana than Infernal Grasp or Power Word Kill, but the upside is you get to blow up a planeswalker. We're gonna have to see how relevant that is. Right now, there's not a ton of planeswalkers running around outside of Wrenn and 7, but we might see more in the future, and having a single card that relatively efficiently can blow up a Goldspan Dragon or an activated Azeka's Chariot or a Wrenn and 7 is a pretty big deal. So I expect this to see a lot of play in standard. It saw a lot of play last time around. Murderous Rider saw a reasonable amount of play, so I think that this card should be really good in standard, and it's definitely sweet to see it downgraded to uncommon for the first time ever. Should make it a little bit cheaper, a nice budget option for commander decks as well. We also got Edgar's Awakening, a 5-mana reanimation spell that, if you discard it, you can pay 1, and if you do, you can return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. So 5-mana reanimation, kind of the going rate in standard these days. The interesting part is the ability to discard it. Kind of calls back to Call to the Netherworld. Call to the Netherworld, you can Madness it for 0 mana. So if you discard it, you can cast it, and it returns a black creature from your graveyard to your hand. This is a card that is seen play in various Madness decks in the past. I could see Edgar's Awakening doing something else. Call to the Netherworld isn't legal in Pioneer and Historic and Standard. Plus, remember, we got blood tokens for days, so this gives you a card that in the late game, if you got enough mana, you can just get back your Anj or whatever big thing you want. In the early game, you can discard it to a blood token, kind of for free, and get back a creature that you discarded earlier to a blood token. So if we see some sort of like pseudo Madness style deck develop with the blood tokens and the vampires in Standard, I could see Edgar's Awakening potentially being a part of it. So Really interesting design, kind of like the flexibility of it. We also got a reprint in Mulch, just 4 mana, reveal the top 4 cards of your library, snag all the lands for your hand, the rest go to the graveyard. This is the original version of Ren and 7's +1 ability, essentially. You would just plus it, hopefully draw a bunch of lands, and this is a card that has been used in Standards past as a way to fill your graveyard, essentially. Maybe you get a land or two, plus you dump some cards in the graveyard. So if you're playing some sort of graveyard style deck, Mulch is definitely a 2 mana play to keep in mind. We also got Thirst for Discovery, the latest in our somewhat long line of thirsty draw spells. So 3 mana blue card, instant, draw 3 cards, discard 2 cards unless you discard a basic land. So discard 2 of anything or 1 basic land. We have Thirst for Knowledge, we have Thirst for Meaning. These are both cards that have seen play primarily in decks that care about filling the graveyard, really across formats. So this is a very efficient spell. Thirst for Discovery does require basic lands if you do want to discard 1 card on occasion, and it's going to depend on your build. Some builds are going to be better at that. When you're instant speed, drawing 3 and discarding 1, this is a nice source of card advantage. Worst case, it's a good way to filter, to fill your graveyard with flashback spells, reanimation targets, or whatever. So like Thirst for Meaning and Thirst for Knowledge before it, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of graveyard deck that was looking to take advantage of Thirst for Discovery in Standard. Although it's just pure card advantage, I don't think it's going to get there. If you're just trying to like draw cards and have no graveyard synergies, then you got Behold the Multiverse, you got Memory Day, you lose, you got Graven Lord. There's a lot of other options, but in the decks that care about filling the graveyard, maybe you got a Leer or something that you're trying to fuel, then Thirst for Discovery is a really good option. We also got Ancient Lumberknot, pretty fun card, 4 mana 1/4 tree folk that says each creature you control with toughness greater than its power assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. So I don't think this will really necessarily be a thing in Standard, but it seems like a nice addition to Doran and other toughness matter commander decks, kind of a backup to what your commander is trying to do. If you're going to play a bunch of high toughness, low power, or no powered creatures, you want to make sure you have a Doran effect on the battlefield, so you want as many of these as possible, and technically Ancient Lumberknot is going to be, on its face, a 4/4 for 4, which is not, broken by standards, but a fine body that's going to do something. In Standard, if you want to go full meme mode, probably the most hilarious thing to do is play it with Cherix. Like, Cherix turning into a 17/17 if you have Ancient Lumberknot out actually seems kind of funny. I don't think that'll be good. They're both 4 drops, it's in 3 colors, but it does seem like a good against odds or budget Magic deck at a minimum, the one-shot crab attack. So Ancient Lumberknot, upgrade for certain commander decks, and a nice janky fun card for Standard. Otherwise, we got a bunch of other lower rarity stuff, which I don't think will make it in constructive. If anything does make it, Honeymooner's Hearse. It is pretty big, 5/5 trample for 3 that essentially cruise by tapping 2 creatures, so I don't know. We haven't really seen these big vehicles work in Standard before, plus we're in a Standard that has like Prismari Command and other main deck artifact removal, Braids entering the format, so that is a vote against it, but at least something to look out for in Limited. The other card that's kind of worth keeping in mind is Honored Heirloom, 3 mana rock that can also pay 2 and exile a card from a graveyard. I don't think this is playable. We got Celestis. We haven't seen these 3 mana rocks really take off in Standard in recent years, but if we end up in a world where exiling cards from the graveyard is super important, then maybe this is in the conversation as a ramp spell that is also a hate card against your opponent's flashback spells and recursive creatures and reanimation targets. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Innistrad Crypts and Vows spoilers for today. So let me know what you think. What are you most hyped for from today? How good is the new Mythic Vampire? All the other stuff, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. I hope you all enjoy it, and I'll be back tomorrow with more daily Innistrad Crypts and Vows spoilers. So until then, have an amazing day, everyone, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.